Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host Thomas Sheridan. It's Thursday, the 6th of September 2016. My God, the year is flying by quickly. I hope you had a good week since last week. I'm delighted with the feedback to the last two shows, the last Thursday show and the Sunday sermon. And I'm glad you're still on board, you're still enjoying it, and I think you're still finding what I have to say is relative and relevant and interesting, at least. Tonight, I have a really good show for you. We're going to talk about basically about all esoteric tonight, and I'll be talking later on about I'll be reading from one of the archives, one of the documents I have in my archive of many esoteric documents, Freemason documents, occult documents, secret society documents that I've begun collecting or have been collecting for a few years, and it's really taking off now because I have a friend who's an antiques dealer, and he's been absolutely hitting home runs with this feckin' stuff that he's been getting me. Mostly collections by elderly people in positions of power in Irish towns, and look, anyone who says that the elite, and by the elite I mean the people who have money or power positions in society, are not involved in the occult while they're living in cloud cuckoo land, because these books on theosophy, Freemasonry, even got one on Ariosophy, and loads of stuff like really hardcore esoteric stuff. Where did they come from? The houses of wealthy people who are powerful in their communities. This is why they're powerful, and this is why they keep this stuff secret on. That's why I'm getting it and leaking it out to you. Now, before I do that, I want to give you my website. It's www.streetdruid.net. That's the present website, and the website that's like the archive and the one for all the blogs and everything is www.thomassheridanarts.com. Now, before I get to reading that story, I want to cover something very interesting about, shall we say, tampering with the fairy world and the consequences of that. People can laugh at this stuff, but it's taken very seriously in countries like Ireland and Iceland. I want to read you a brief passage from my book, The Druid Code, Magic, Megaliths and Mythology, that deals with this, and an interesting story. Regardless of their place in far-off antiquity or up to the very present, we humans continue to remain very complex creatures indeed. And these megalithic structures reflect our human complexity in every way imaginable. I myself believe in many things which are unseen, and I observe their shadow move across the face of this world. We've all had these magical, fleeting insights and experiences. Rarely do they grab our attention and force us to look more deeply. The truth always waits for you to be ready to find it and to reveal itself to you, and not the other way round. The emotional energy and aesthetic of the ancient megaliths, even when they have been ravaged by everything from religious intolerance, agriculture, urbanization, bureaucracy, and ignorance, still manage to communicate with us on some powerful subconscious level. Even archaeologists have admitted to me that there were moments when they put down their equipment and rationality, only to find themselves emotionally, if not whispered quietly, spiritually overwhelmed when working on some megalithic dig site, when the sunset or sunrise was just right and they found themselves caught up in the magic of these mysterious stones and earthworks. Their ability to call us has personally led me to walk for miles in the wind and rain across the often soaky and boggy mountainous landscape of rural Sligo, where I live in the northwest of Ireland, only to find, for no explicable reason, drawn to a cluster of remote trees, and not being satisfied until I was in their centre, then only to discover much later on, via an old Irish Ordnance Survey map, that this precise location where I stood was the centre of an ancient rath, or fairy fort, where the semi-mystical race, the Tuatha Danann, are reputed to be laying in wait for the day when they are called to return to this reality and save Ireland. The ring of trees are allowed by farmers, even in this day and age, to grow unhindered around these fairy forts, so the livestock and even children do not accidentally wander into the domain of the Sidhe, the people of the mound, or the Anashi as they're also known, lest they be carried away into the fifth province of the other world. This is the origin of the phrase "away with the fairies." And believe me, as prosaic as I like to think I generally am, I agree with the old farmers in this respect. In the early 1980s, a future Irish billionaire, Sean Quinn, knowingly ordered his quarrying company to demolish the 4,000-year-old Aughrim wedge tomb at Ballyconnell in County Cavan to further expand his growing quarrying and concrete empire. By 2012, the billions he had accumulated were gone, along with his once mighty construction and insurance empire. Quinn himself was left with less money in his bank account than when he had ordered the demolition of Aughrim wedge tomb 25 years previously. Several older people in rural County Cavan issued dire warnings back in the early 1980s, claiming that Sean Quinn's attack upon the Sidhe would lead to the ruin of both himself and his family. This is precisely what happened. In fact, no sooner had Quinn removed the megalith than there was a sudden increase in his fleet of trucks mysteriously breaking down, losing control, and going off the road. Quinn then attempted to replace the megalithic stones in their original arrangement. To this day, people tell me that he regretted his violation of the Sidhe. Not only has his business empire collapsed, but the knock-on effects of his empire collapsing has led to massive unemployment levels in the border region. Now, the reason why I'm reading that is because of a news story that's recently come up in Iceland. But let me tell you, people in Ireland take this stuff very, very seriously, and with good reason. And even the ones who may scoff and laugh it off still take it very seriously, that you do not mess with the megaliths, the mounds, the hills, the ring fairy forts of what they call the gentry or the good people. Now, a story came out recently, and some of you may have seen it in all over the world media, and I'm reading it here from Yahoo News, and it says Iceland unearths rocks to appease angry elves. Now, the Icelandic version of an elf is very different than the elves in Tolkien's thing. They're more like the Irish leprechauns. They're dark-skinned, mischievous and vindictive people. Now it says here, construction sites in Iceland have moved so they do not disturb the local elfin population. Reykjavik. Iceland has been forced to bow to pressure from elves and uncover a supposedly enchanted elfin rock after highway workers accidentally buried it, infuriating the mythical creatures, reports said Tuesday. The angry elves were suspected of causing a series of mishaps after the rock was covered over when workers cleared away the debris from a landslide. The Morgunblaðið Daily reported. Iceland is no stranger to bending to the will of its elfin population. Construction sites had previously been moved so as not to disturb the creatures, and fishermen have refused to go to sea because of their warnings. In Iceland, elves are a part of everyday life. Seven Sofarsson, who works at the Bass Road Construction Company, told the paper that his woes began in August 2015 in Siglungfjordur, close to the site of the so-called Elfin Ladystone, that was covered with earth following efforts to clear a mudslide from the highway. After the landslide was cleared, the road was subsequently flooded, and colleagues of Zopfoniasion came to clear the route. Was injured. Then industrial machinery began to fail, just like in Ireland, and the journalists who came to cover the growing chaos fell into a mud pool and had to be pulled to safety. Nobody even thought of the rock, even though the area is regarded as a sacred place in local folklore. The decision was made that the Iceland Road Administration would unearth the rock, an artefact according to the 2000 law to protect Iceland's elfin heritage, and it was subsequently cleaned with a pressure washer last week. Elves are described by the hundreds of people who claim to have seen them as simple, normally peaceful creatures who look like humans but smaller. That's very similar to how they are in Ireland. They're generally peaceful until you annoy them. In 1971's Elves reported the disrupted construction of a national highway from Reykjavik to the northeast. The project suffered repeated unusual difficulties because it was claimed Elves did not want the large boulder that served as their home to be moved to make way for a new road. Now, you can laugh at this all you like, but when these things happen, they may call them elves, there may be other beings, but they may be actually a result of people doing this. But I've noticed that they use that they will suddenly try to fix it. Now, this area where they fixed, or well, they've restored the mound that the highway is being built over. I guarantee you, in years to come, that will be a major accident spot. There will be more accidents there. Cars will go, trucks will go, buses will go off the road. And this is what happens in Ireland. The National Roads Authority, to this day, even expensive multi-million euro road and highway projects will move the location of roundabouts, junctions, exits on major roads. It happened on the Galway to Dublin road not too long when it was being built about 10 years ago, the new motorway, and they will say it's because of cultural importance. They'll use terms like it's of cultural importance. But the reality is that they know that locals will go nuts if they do it, and the attitude is not so much with the engineers of fear. It's more of a case of let's not do it, not do it. Now that brings me to another story in Ireland. This time the story revolves around a factory being built, or some kind of plant being built on a ferry fort or a raft, as I previously mentioned. This comes from the journal.ie. Waterford historians unimpressed by US company's plan to clear the ancient settlement. Local historians have hit out at a plan to demolish a Waterford ring fort that dates back to 5,000 years. Now, while that may sound amazing that they're actually doing this, there are something like 30 to 40,000 ring forts in Ireland. Let that sink in. 30 to 40,000. So there's like within probably a 15-minute walk of my house, there's 3. US firm West Pharmaceutical Services began building a manufacturing plant on the Knockhouse site earlier this week. The trivalent ring fort will be cleared during the second phase of the development, which the company says will deliver 100 new jobs once the factory is open. While company-funded archaeologists will record and preserve any valuable artefacts found on the site, the rock supporting the ancient monument will be leveled to make way for the new plant. Unique site. As construction on the land gets underway, local historians have established a new Facebook page to raise awareness of the archaeological importance. It's incredible site, says historian Chewy Cusack told the journal.ie. Cusack said he was disappointed that Waterford City and Council, which approved the multi-million euro development, has allowed commercial interest to override concerns about the site's preservation. Lar Power, the council's director for economic development and planning, told the journal.ie that it was fully supportive of the resolution of the ring fort at Knockhouse. The site has been zoned for strategic industrial development for many years in the full knowledge of the presence of the ring fort. The work begin completing is to fully resolve the site and record the findings. He is interesting, an interesting term there, resolve. A nice word of saying destroy. He added that the development has the full approval of the National Monument Service and is being carried out under full supervision and in accordance with best practice. License to clear land. Emily Denny, a spokesperson for the West Pharmaceutical Services, confirmed that local authorities had sanctioned the land as a strategic industrial site. The company agreed to pay for archaeological work on the ring fort, which it was aware of before the site's purchase, she said. Denny told the journal.ie that the National Monument Service had issued the company with a license to demolish the ring fort while recording and preserving any artefacts found on the land. A process of post-excavation analysis will be carried out before the final report, and the excavation will be shared with the public. We hope that the information will add to the public's knowledge and appreciation of Waterford's rich archaeological heritage while they're burying it. So let me tell you something about this. Don't be surprised if you hear about in the future this company, it's one of its products killing people and it getting sued and going out of business, that all kinds of accidents and people killed during the construction, or we hope not, but don't be surprised if it happens, or the company flops and something happens to the company. It just doesn't, it's not able to produce good products or something. So keep an eye out on that one. But there we have another example. And this is like, it goes on and on and on and it never stops. And some people will laugh at it, but as I spoke about John Quinn in the Druid Code, it's no laughing matter. To lose an empire, lose a personal fortune, I think he was worth something like 7 or 9 billion euros. It's all gone now. Don't mess with the fairies. Don't mess with the she. Don't mess with the little people. Now, on to other matters. As I was saying, I have a sizable collection of antiquarian books. Well, a growing collection. It's getting better. But a lot of the things people miss out on, and some of the documents I have are not actually complete. They're clippings from magazines that might have to do with someone, say, 100 years ago, bought a journal or a magazine, and they kept 2 or 3 pages of it. When 10 years ago or 5 years ago, when someone was going through the archives to see what was valuable, they may have found these 3 or 4 pages in a book, and then they put them in a plastic binder and they send them to the auction house, and people like me pick them up. Now, we hear about periodicals and we hear about annuals and we hear about books, but one of the things we never really hear about are something called pamphlets. Now, in an age before the internet, the alternative media was things called pamphlets. Now, pamphlets were basically a large sheet of paper, which was cheap paper, on which alternative, radical, subversive, and political ideas, and very many esoteric ideas and writings were printed on both sides, and then the thing was chopped up and cut up in a certain way that it would make, say, like a mini kind of newsletter, like a fanzine. This is the forerunners of the fanzines of the 80s and not the 80s, 70s, and 80s, in such a way that you had like a small booklet, and it was usually done in small type, which actually makes them very hard to read today as they're fading. They're in small type to get as much information on these few pages, and lots of them were about esoteric subjects. Now, I've got this one I'm going to read out to you. I don't know where it's from, but I want to talk about these pamphlets some more. You remember in my book, Walpurgis Night, I spoke about Ostara. Ostara was a pamphlet, and it was founded in 1905 by the occultist Lanz von Lebensfeld in Vienna, Austria, and which he had his Völkisch, which is like Teutonic, sort of like folk revival ideas in anti-Semitic literature. And it was named after the old High German goddess Ostara, which is, you know what that is anyway. And Lanz claims that the Ostrogoths, the nation of Austria, were named after this goddess. Basically, Ostara popularized the swastika and gave birth to what would become eventually National Socialism. And Hitler was a huge fan. Young Hitler even took a tram out to land Elisenfeld's castle for the Order of the Templars, and to get back issues he didn't have in his collection. And they're very interesting magazines. Some of them talk about things like sex magic and the idea of using electronic mind control and mind thought reading ideas, as well as all kinds of other weird things. A lot of it is basically reconstructed theosophy, and a lot of the Ariosophy stuck in that as well. Another famous one that you might have read about in Holy Blood, Holy Grail was the Ancre, the French resistance magazine, in which the Priory of Zion was heavily featured in. And that's where it gave get your man, I forget his name, Plantain or Van Planton or something, Planton. And this is the book was basically around finding these, and it was although it was probably all forgery anyway, they were actual real magazines and pamphlets found in there, such as Regnabit and others, which played a pivotal role in not only the book itself, but they're creating this huge interest in Freemasonry, European secret societies, the Merovingian dynasties, and which led eventually to like an international sensation, the Da Vinci Code. So we can, these pamphlets and these journals and these shall we say newsletters were so important back in the day, and they have an enormous social and societal role. But as I was saying, many of them dealt, okay, the most uncommon one would be to deal with things like politics, anarchism, trade unions, socialism, that kind of thing. The other ones were to deal with things like cultural and satires, and then you would have from that the esoteric, the occult, very popular with spiritualist circles, these kinds of documents and indeed the fanzines of the 1970s and 80s were probably, especially the fanzines at the end of the 80s, which I was an enormous fan of. These fanzines were the end of that era, because then the internet was slowly taken in, and by that time big media, television and radio and big publications, Time, Newsweek, and all the magazines and the newsstand publications had taken over the world. But prior to that, prior to the age of Randolph Hearst, prior to the age of the BBC and so on, these pamphlets and these newsletters were how people got alternative information. Now, unfortunately, you come across them and they're damaged. The ones I find are the ones now. I'm very lucky in that I know antiques dealers personally, and they're always looking out for things. And if they see anything interesting, and God bless them, they do find me great things. It sometimes can be just 2 or 3 pages that someone had saved 100 years ago or whatever, and put them in a binder. So it doesn't. They didn't have the title heads in a lot of these pamphlets back in the day, but this one, wherever it came from, I have the date on it. It's 1917, and I've confirmed that. And it's from I don't know what it's from, but I do know the author. It is dated on the text, and the author is called Clara M. Hood. And what it's called is The Power of Thought. And this is basically a dissertation or an essay on, well, I'm going to leave it with you, the power of thought. But I'm going to read this to you. And bear in mind that the publication of Miss Clodd's, Clara M. Clodd's essay here is 1917. That means it's nearly 100 years old. And some of you who woke up, quote unquote, in the last few years might be shocked to find out that the information that you believed about manifesting thoughts and things like that were not as, shall we say, as cutting edge and clever as you formerly believed they were. The Power of Thought by Miss Clara M. Hood. There is no need in these days very seriously discuss whether such a power exists, since the majority of us are already convinced of the fact. It may be that the discovery of wireless telegraph caused most of us to begin to wonder whether there were not an invisible method of communication between mind, and some of us dream of a future age when men will commune with each other more fully and completely than by spoken word. Forgive me if I make mistakes here, the text is very faded. The facts of telepathy, says Sir Oliver Lodge, are indisputably established, namely that knowledge is transmitted between separate minds without apparently any material medium of communication. No man liveth or dieth to himself, said St. Paul, and we have yet to fully realize that no one ever thinketh to himself alone, yet indissolubly bound together we are by the bonds of a corporate inner life. It will be the providence, then, of the short paper to try and point out firstly how the universal magic power of thinking affects ourselves individually and secondly, how it affects others. How our thinking affects ourselves. In man, the microcosm, the power of thinking and imagining, is the reflection of the creative power in the macrocosm, the oversoul. God, Brahman meditated on the worlds, and the world sprang into being, says the ancient scripture from the East. And it is clear that all activities in man, especially creative activity, is the outcome of thought. So creative a power is thought, that a man's inner and outer self is continually being renewed or rebuilt by every thought and emotion which is his. And this is even the case with the outermost vehicle of himself, his physical body, with its environment. Many seemingly miraculous cures in the Christian science and new thought movements are due to this truth. And for its passing demonstration, we need only mention the experiments of Dr. Elmer Gates, who discovered, by taking a drop of blood from his patients after sudden excitation or depression of spirits, a fit of temper, and so on, that in every instance the chemical constitutes of the blood became changed. Other doctors have noticed that perspiration alters in accordance with the mood of the mind. And everyone is familiar with the fact that a bad fit of temper in a nursing mother may poison her babe. Perhaps the medical science of the future may be able to trace our connection between, say, indigestion and a previous fit of temper or the blues. But at any rate, it is rapidly becoming recognized that pessimistic antisocial thoughts and moods actually produce poisons in the blood, and that love and happiness are potent means towards gaining and preserving physical health. When we consider the effects of our thinking on the inner self of man, that which manifests through the kingdoms of the heart and the mind, then it is even more striking. A man's character, may be said, is to be the sum total, the synthesis of all his past thinkings and feelings. And in that past, we must not only place that which is behind us in the present incarnation, but also all the lives that we have already passed through before. For they are all causally related to one another. As day after day makes one sequence in this present small copy of our big life journey, people are accustomed to say, when brought face to face with any failing in their present stock and trade of moral and mental capacity, "Oh, I can't help it. I was born like that. That is how I was made," not realizing that they are at any moment is what they have made of themselves through the long past, and there is no reason why, when they understand the process, they should not be able to remake themselves at any moment they decide so. The house immortal in the heavens, which we are occupied in building, life after life, in that inner vestitude of a mortal spirit, popularly dominated the soul, the psyche of St. Paul, the gradual perfecting vessel of the pure pneuma or breath of God, which is our only true self. And this psychic or soul self manifests by what is known as inherent character and capacity. The death of a body does not put an end to the process of growth. We resurrect continually in other freshly envelopes to continue that building day after day, our material for growth being our common life experiences. How, therefore, life's experiences transmuted by thought affect the inner self can be more easily grasped by reference to the psychic plane of objective life. Nowadays, on psychic matters, and speaking generally, we are beginning to grasp that the soul of things is in some intangible, subtle way a fact, even a material fact, that the material of which is composed of another order, that the known as physical and that is known as physical and interpenetrates the physical world by reason of its tenuity and finesse, much as either interpenetrates the grosser states of physical plane matter. Hence, the soul of man has on the subtle plane an objective appearance, interpenetrating the physical body and sending a radiation beyond it, technically called the aura, Veda, the nimbus, the auroral of the medieval art, which is discernible to a certain order of clairvoyant vision. This radiation constitutes a magnetic field of influence, which we are subjectively aware of when we sense what we now designate as being atmosphere, quote unquote. The point of interest, however, lies in this fact that magnetic radiation is not a pure white light, but full of ever-changing prismatic hues, every shade of color in the aura corresponding to a certain mood or emotion. Hence, to a fully trained clairvoyant, a man's soul is as an open book. But in parentheses, let me state that such an efficiency of psychic equipment is very rare, and it is concomitant of a high degree of moral and spiritual development. An example of two will make this clear. Suppose we, endowed with the necessary power of vision, were watching someone in a particularly happy or affectionate frame of mind, a mother kissing her baby, for example, then we should see that personal radiation becoming suffused with a lovely rosy glow. Such a person is said to look at the world through rosy spectacles. Truly so, through the rosy medium of her happy, loving self. Or again, picture ourselves studying someone in a highly devotional frame of mind. Then the aura will be full of lovely blues of the deep Italian sky. Perhaps the psychic truth accounts for the tradition which paints the ceilings of chapels and many chapels blue, and which led to the old Italian painters so often to clothe the Lord's Mother in a cloak of the same divine hue, emblem of the devotion which was so preeminently hers. Again, those same ceilings are often studded with golden stars. This too has its counterpart in the hidden side of nature, for high aspirational prayers seem there just like stars flying upwards and never failing, must it be said in passing, to draw down a glorious response. Sometimes far other than these beautiful thoughts may be observed. When a man sees red on the inner side, deep angry flashes of dull red shoot forth, and though he may refrain from striking the one in anger with on this side, he injures him upon the other. And so the teacher taught us that he who was angry with his brother was guilty in a lesser degree of the crime of murder. Now, no emotion lasts forever, and so after a time the mood passes and the corresponding shade of colour in the aura dies down, but something of it is added to the permanent constitutes of the inner self, making it increasingly easy to feel that emotion, to think that thought again. In this way, we have built and rebuilt our inner selves, our character, through all the past. And here we have the genesis of this process. Any moral quality which we possess began once with a thought. The thought repeated became a tendency, the tendency established became a quality. By pressure from without, environment, much of ourselves became built. By pressure from within, will, we may alter that which is not good and beautiful and therefore build our permanence in ourselves. Reverse the process, and here it may help to take a concrete example. Suppose we happen to be of a morose and pessimistic order of mind. It is only a point of view and not a true one. We determine that we will become the opposite, start to think in the other direction, take every other opportunity, no matter how much the already established set in your inner self may drag you otherwise, to try and see the beautiful and cheerful aspect of things. It will begin to come, that capacity to see it, with hard practice. Count your blessings. As the old people used to say, instead of the other things, and keep it up. Never mind if you fail seemingly 1,000 times, and keep it up, and one day, with a sense of joyful power, you will find yourself becoming that which you have determined. Two words of warning here. First, do not try to deal with more than one failing at a time, and deal with that alone until it is conquered. So many people say, "Oh, how I wish I were good," and they go on wishing without arriving without arriving to the end of life, because they do not apply the same method and common sense to building themselves as they would to building a house. First, we have to clearly define a plan, and then we proceed to build according to the plan, brick by brick, one step at a time. Secondly, never despair. God shall forgive all these. God shall forgive thee all but thy despair. Sorry, italics are hard to read in this. God shall forgive thee all but thy despair. The result is so certain because it is the law. If only we persevere long enough, and we have that power if we will trust ourselves. Let us remember the words of a great and compassionate master of wisdom. You must trust yourself. You say, "I know myself too well." If you say that, you do not know yourself. You only know the weak outer husk which has fallen so often into the mire. But you, the real you are the spark of God's own fire. And because of that, there is nothing that you may not do if you will. How our thinking affects others. First of all, we affect others precisely by what we are ourselves. That magnetic radiation which we carry around with us, our individual atmosphere, quote unquote, is continually affecting every person and everything which we come into contact. It does not need occultism to teach us this, for we are all aware of it. Who does not know the power of the wet blanket to run spirits down to zero and vice versa? And how is this? Let us take an illustration from physics. If we put the pedal of a piano down and sing a note over the top of it, the piano will give us back the same note. One or two tuning forks of the same pitch in one room, and one set going and the other commences to sing. This is because sound waves going out in every direction through the ether, when they meet a responsive medium, tend to set up a similar vibration. Thus thoughts, which are primarily vibrations in a subtler substance than the ether, going out from each one of us, tend, when they meet a suitable medium, such as the inner self of other people, to evoke a similar response. And in this way, we continually act and react on each other all the time. Who knows how far the influence of a thought may spread in the ever-widening circles of space? Thus, instinctively, we turn to the strong, the joyous, the serene, in times of trouble and distress, because their atmosphere radiating strongly at the center at a certain rate of vibration helps to tune us to a pitch we cannot achieve alone. Most of all, in this invisible influence of good and evil, evidence is dealing with little children. For the inner self of a little child is extraordinarily responsive, reflecting almost as a mirror the thoughts and moods of the grown-ups around him. Therefore, children should, as far as possible, be kept from sight and sound of all which is ugly, inharmonious, sinful, for in these first years of a child's psychic self acquires a set, quote unquote, which never entirely deserts it in afterlife. Wise was the great man who said, "Give me a child until he is 7 years old, and all the world may do what they will with him afterwards." I'm going to stop here for a second and just review what we've read so far. So basically, what this lady is describing here is what they talk about, that people who have a similar nature, a similar essence, a similar thought pattern, they lock with one another. We've all experienced this in our lives. And then went on to describe how this is affected by the internal character of the person and the importance of treating children properly and exposing them to nurturing and loving and safe environments when they're growing up. And she even put in that famous quote about "give me a child until they're 7." And that came directly from the Jesuits, believe it or not. The Jesuits discovered, as did the mystery schools, and going right back to the ancient Greek and Roman times, that you could, if you changed a child before they were 7, you could alter them to be that particular, shall we say, subset for the rest of their life. That's why they're pushing education back further and further, and kids are going to school younger and younger. Have you noticed that? They mentioned the colors of auras. Now, this article came out before we had anything like very good spectrometry photography and things like scanners and things like that, and cameras. Cameras are purely film cameras. And yet, back in 1917, these esoteric and occult circles were aware of all this stuff. This was written just basically at the height of World War I in England. Absolute carnage on the Western Front. There's something about this is the bright side of the shadow being what they called the Great War. And then all these pamphlets were distributed on the streets of London and other British cities, telling ordinary people that the world was a far more bigger place than the horror which the governments and the politicians and the royalty had inflicted upon their families with this war. The shadow always cast the light always cast the shadow. This was you could think of somebody saying, sitting in a terraced house in 1917, Lancashire in England, all the relatives have lost at least one son, brother, cousin, uncle, father in the Somme or in Passchendaele Vale or in Verdun or one of the other meat grinders of the Western Front. And for them to read this kind of thing would have been remarkable. It would have had a remarkable effect upon them, especially how it starts off talking about reincarnation. Could you only imagine how important this would have been? And that's why these pamphlets were laughed upon and mocked by the prevailing academic classes. This is why they were alternative media, because they gave people hope. The world was so dark, it gave them hope. And I find that there's definitely two kinds of pamphlets that appear. I mentioned Ostara. Now, Ostara basically was a German pamphlet that said that, Germany's a mess, Europe's in a mess, and it's the fault of the Jews. Sound familiar? Where this one, and most of the ones I found, would be called New Age guff today, but they were definitely they were not inciting hate against anyone. But again, we have people standing on stages with their arms spread apart, talking about when they saw the Matrix movie, they couldn't believe it. I nearly fell off my chair because it validated what I've been saying for years. No, you haven't been saying it for years. This stuff has been well known before you were even born. And yet these people continue to take, even today, even like we have, we will have some new age guru in 20 years' time will be telling people, I have discovered that our thoughts create reality. Even the language used in this document is very interesting. The use of words like will. This is all magical script. So I'm just wondering if this person was a theosophist or something. We will we will discover as we go on, as I produce more and more of these documents on the air. And let me know in the comments if you're enjoying this or not. Let me know if this is to your taste. To me, this is fascinating. This is the kind of you're getting an insight into how I spend most of my evenings when I'm not doing other things. I'm trawling through old documents and pamphlets. So let me know if this is appealing to you or not, and we can keep this up. Continuing with the article, the power of thought. Now, whilst we are all of us thus continually about aiding and hindering evolution by a habitual attitude of mind and thoughts, something more happens when we think quite specifically of anyone, a friend, say, for example. What happened? What happens on the inner side when we think of him? First of all, our own aura takes on the rosy hue of pure affection, which heightens in us the power of loving, and presently there attaches itself from the aura a little flower-like form or thought form, quote unquote, straight as an arrow to its mark. The thought form flies across space and distance and makes no difference in its flight, guided by the magnetic line of communication which exists between all hearts. And reaching the loved one awaits a responsive mood when it enters his aura and becomes part of himself, heightening him too. The power of loving. Then never is it a waste of time to think about the people whom we love. For by doing so, we give them a gift of our very selves, made of our very soul substance. And it is a gift none is too poor to give, and one which will be with the beloved not only for this short life, but for all lives to come. And death makes no barrier to the passage of this most beautiful of gifts. Even more vividly and more potently do our thoughts reach our beloved dead, since they are now working through a subtler medium of expression, which expresses thoughts and emotions more wonderfully. But let us therefore take care that we not only send them beautiful thoughts, not thoughts of grief and appeal to come back. We would not grieve if we were realized how much beautiful was the life they have now lived, free from a time of cares of school day upon earth. Prayers for the dead, that ancient and gracious custom, weave invisible flowers of comfort and love for those passed on beyond the veil. So supremely beautiful are the thoughts of love in the invisible world, so potent and so wonderful their protective and stimulating power. But alas, powerful also are the thoughts which are not loving, not beautiful, for these also make thought forms. They also find out the person thought of, and if he has anything in him which can respond, it too will find entrance, heightening the one thought of the evil thus defined. Very often, not only do we remark an evil quality on ourselves, but proceed to admit it out into a number of others, proceedings supposed to be popular at tea parties, etc. She's talking about gossip, people gossiping about people and causing slander, and how these thought forms, these negative, these feelings of hatred and spite are transmitted like darts into the person. It goes outside the drawing room where the tea party is going on. Imagine that it is happening on the other side. The unfortunate subject of these conversations is being deluged by a positive cataract of the most unthoughtful thought forms. Well, has it been said, give a dog a bad name and hang him? Evil speaking has done more harm than murder. If we did but realize how cruel an act is. But if the one ill spoken of has not that evil in him, then evil thoughts will return to their creators. Verily, Curses coming home to roost. How many articles, folks, this is me talking now, have I written and how many videos have I said where don't worry about psychic attacks. They're only dangerous if you let them in. If you laugh them off or you ignore them, these curses go home to whence they came. For example, smear campaigns. Don't mention the name of the individual who does it. At best, give them nicknames, but don't mention them directly. If you mention them by name, you've brought a demon into life. You never name a demon. When you're under psychic attack, you laugh it off or you go no contact ever again. And the darts of poison go back to whence they came. Curses paid back with interest. And this article is making this quite clear 100 years ago. Let us remember returning to the article, let us remember one great cardinal truth. All that in ourselves or others, which is good and beautiful, is a manifestation of the Eternal One in us, the angel, the higher self in a man, who doth always behold the face of the Father in heaven. And we can never pass away once shown. On the contrary, evil is temporary in its nature and is no part of the real man. It is indeed only a sign that the opposite good has not yet been brought into activity from the latent depths of themselves. Truly, as Browning said, the silence which implies the sound. To dwell in thought on, moving over here, the evil in ourselves or others is to lend life to that which has only a temporary existence and must one day pass away. Although we all possess this creative power, we possess it in a varying degree. Definite, deep, sustained thought is indefinitely more potent than ordinary loose surface thinking. One good method of increasing and strengthening that power is by setting apart a small time each day, say 15 minutes to half an hour, for real hard thinking. As most of us cannot do this without help, choose a noble book by a favorite author and read it sentence by sentence very slowly. At the end of each sentence, pause and think over that sentence for a few minutes. At the end of the paragraph, sum up in your own words, as few as possible, its central message. The gist of what has been put forward. This is an excellent exercise here. Brilliant, actually. Return to the article. If you are unused to study like this, you will find it very laborious proceeding, but perseverance will bring a sense of clarity and steadiness into the mind, and along with a growing faculty to seize upon the essential point in a paragraph, will grow in power to discern the essentials also in life. This is wonderful. This woman, Clara M. Claude, is putting forward some beautiful and some powerful truths in this article. 99 years ago, folks. Returning to the article. Another way of helping ourselves with our own thought power is the following. Take 5 or 10 minutes in the early morning, almost immediately after rising, when the mind is clear and unoccupied, and try morning after morning to make clear to yourself the ideal either of what you yourself would like to become or the good work you would like to do in humanity's name through your daily avocations. And where shall we find so splendid an embodiment of this picture in the most beautiful and best of man as the elder brothers of the race, the firstborn amongst his many brethren, are for ourselves, the great teacher, Christ. For he was and is a perfect man, and the capacity to become one day even as he lies latent within us all. As day after day we dwell in his beauty, picturing to ourselves what we should do in all our rounds of life, trying to intuit even more clearly the wisdom and compassion, that mighty heart we shall begin to reflect in small measures something of that loveliness, and thus beholding, as in a glass darkly, we find ourselves changing after that loved ideal, charging after that loved ideal. For true it is that we can but learn to see the highest. We need we needs must we needs must love as well, and love it in which transforms a man into the likeness of that which he loves. Moreover, remember, we cannot think of him unless, too, he thinks of us. Whatever we think of, high or low, in the universe, with that at once we are in communication. Whatever we love above us, below us, beside us, that must be inevitably reached. So when we think of him, the heart of the world, our very thoughts fly to him, and we are as little flowers laid at his feet. But for every flower thus sent, he gives back a blessing. So we may, thus in the inner world, make straight a way to him. Yet, what many do by thought of him, others do by thought of his people, their brother men. For in reality, the one are two, and to love man is also to love him. And that was by Clara M. Cott. At the end there, it finishes very Gnostic, I might add. It reminds me of the writings there, remind me an awful lot of the Gospel of St. Thomas. Very, very similar kind of language. I'm pretty sure this person was probably a theosophist who wrote this article. I can find no information on this woman, Clara M. Hood. She was, all I could find was that she was associated with a group called the TPH, which was based in 1 Upper Warburton Place, London. I looked and I found nothing anywhere, not on Google, not in any of the registry encyclopedias I have, and I looked on Google Maps to see the building, and it's a rather grand building near St. Pancras Station, but it seems to be just now student accommodations these days. So that's fascinating stuff, and it really shows that there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing, there's no. You can walk into a New Age bookstore, and basically what you see is a modern linguistic version of things that have always existed or existed for a long time. They're either recycled versions of theosophy, Ariosophism, Christianity, Gnosticism especially, Freemasonry, and theosophy. Theosophy by far would be the biggest influence on these kinds of documents. That's not to say there's anything wrong with them. You can eat at the cafeteria without ordering from a menu. And this is my attitude to these things always. I'm very much inclined towards heathenism, only because I love nature, and that feels right for me, but I would never join any heathen congregation, a Sturu or any of those things. I would never get involved in any of that. I don't need a congregation, a minister, or a church. My church is the mountains, forests, seaside, oceans, and that's good enough for me. But even a fascinating city. It's funny, I have a very deep spiritual connection to the city of London, which I can't explain, except that I have a strong sense that I was actually lived there as a child, and in a previous life that I think I spoke about this in the show before. I have a very strong memory of being a dock worker from an area. Now, this when I was a little boy. Now, I mean, really young boy. I saw a video of the Kinks song Waterloo Sunset, and they had all footage of of ships being unloaded around the Isle of Dogs. And I said to my mother or my grandmother, whoever was there, I said, I used to live there, and I used to work there as a dock worker. And anytime I see footage of London or I go to London, I feel very much at home. And even now, looking at this 1 Walborn Street near St. Pancras on Google Maps, again, I just wanted to get on a plane and go to London. I don't know what it is about that. I've never lived in the city. I've visited many times. But I don't know what it is about that city that it just has such a strong appeal for me, except that maybe I am a reincarnated, London dock worker, and I really was there. And I died in the 1950s. I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of. But I always feel very much at home, very much comfortable, and very relaxed there. Always. I've never felt, out of place or was a foreign city or a too big a city or anything. But having said that, I've never lived there, so I know it's always different when you lived in a city. But then again, like it's maybe I was meant to. You see, when you read these kind of esoteric or arcane documents, you go and check other sources, and you find that it triggers all kinds of emotions. They almost become like you almost become like a billiard or a snooker table of chain reactions. Like you hit one ball with the cue, and it knocks against one, knocks against another. Some go into the holes, others don't. That's how it makes you feel. They cause you to go on journeys, and you know sometimes the journeys are very fruitful. Like my book, the Druid Code, came out of a series of those kinds of those one of those kinds of journeys. Sometimes they lead to nothing at the time, but then they resolve themselves, just like the thing said. The thought forms gather, and you build the story of yourself later on down the road, and then they come into fruition. They come about as meaningful events and often powerful synchronicities, tremendously powerful synchronicities. And always bear this in mind. I think that the moral of this article from the pamphlet I read, and what I'm talking about here, is don't live in the moment, and don't place too much emphasis on the emotional state of the moment. Try to find a pleasant, balanced, objective state. Don't become too powerfully negatively attached, because that's definitely true. So you're always defining a place by your emotions. Suppose you kissed a pretty girl you were in love with the first time, you will always apply that emotion to the very earth on which you stood. The same thing with if things went horribly wrong, like in a hospital. I was in a hospital a few weeks ago, and it was just a surreal thing. Someone must have been killed in a car crash, and they had the police there. The police usually only go to hospitals for something like that, when someone's in a car crash killed or they've been murdered. And the family was gathered outside, and they're going in to see the room of someone who was dying, and they probably had him on life support. They were going to switch off. But it was really quite surreal, and more people were. Most of the family didn't really seem to care. It was the most bizarre thing. They were not emotionally. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's wrong for me. Maybe it could have been not a nice person. Maybe they knew this was coming. He was reckless. They were expecting it, but it was almost like it was just an inconvenience for them, rather than someone was in that room was dying. In fact, the cop who was there seemed more emotionally charged by the experience. This is why I could never be a policeman or a fireman. I'm not saying anything wrong with those jobs, but I couldn't deal with the emotional aspects of it. Forget all the physical things, the emotional aspects. But what happens is when you have a negative charge, you're grounded into that spot, not in a healthy way. You're bound to it. So it's best to try and seek out pleasant or neutral experiences, and that'll help you build your character. You heard in the recent previous shows I talked about these truthers who are infected. Well, that's exactly what it is. They define themselves by their negativity. They define themselves by their fake victim complexes. They define themselves by their hatred or dislike or need to destroy another person who never did them any harm, and no way affects them at all. And this is what they're grounded to, that they're bonded to that. So you never see, whereas would you rather be bonded to someone who loves you, or you feel good, makes you feel good, or encourages your creativity, or would you rather be bonded to somebody whom you hate? Now remember what I said about the hate in the magazine article. If the other person doesn't give a shit, the arrows go back. They go right back, because they're psychic arrows of attack. They just go right back. But if you put emotional weight upon it, and you start, fighting back, this is what the entity inside them wants. Speaking of theosophy, there's a very good article I'm going to read to you now, dealing with the subject of non-material entities outside the plane of human existence, which feed upon our negative or our dark emotions. Now, when I say dark emotions, I don't say, they're not feeding upon you if you're going to a death metal gig or a goth gig or you're into like horror novels. You're enjoying that. I'm talking about the toxic dark emotions, the pathologically dark emotions, anger, rage, vendettas, hatreds, visceral dislike, anxiety, especially anxiety. This is food for whatever you want to call them, the archons. And when they eat upon that, they eat upon your potential. This is why people who are constantly in a state of hate or anxiety create nothing. They create nothing because they have nothing left to create with, because the hate and anxiety has fed the demons or the archons or wherever you want to call them on the other side, the non-material beings. You're just a smorgasbord. You're just being gorged upon, and often it's this. You're being gorged upon after it's been triggered by a pathological, psychopathic trauma vampire, or just a toxic personality in your life, who's deliberately bringing you down, so their brethren, shall we say, in the non-material world can gorge and feast upon them. This is like such a staple in folklore. The Lianan Shee of the Irish, the Irish fairy of the Gaelic world, the Lianan Shee, sucks the life out of a young man. Vampirism is very common in Irish folklore. This is where Bram Stoker came up with Dracula from. His mother told him the folklore of County Sligo, where she grew up. He lived in Dublin, but he heard all these stories. And the Lianan Shee and the Dareg Dua and these other kind of blood-sucking fairies, these sort of like usually target young males, and artistically or sensitively inclined males. They're nearly always females, these vampires. But the Dareg Dua was probably the Lianan Shee, a rationalization for a psychopathic female, a dark female, a dark predatory female. Now, the story of the Lianan Shee is always the same. You don't talk to it, no contact. If you talk to the Lianan Shee, she has her fangs in you, and she will try to seduce you and flirt with you and try and get you to give her attention. As soon as you get the attention, she'll sink her fangs into you and drain the life force out of you. You'll either die then or you'll die down the road of being wasted away. And we've all met these women in real life, haven't we? The Lianan Shee infected. Not to be sexist, there's other kinds of male dark fairies as well, but I'm just saying, haven't we all met them? They suck the feckin' life out of you. So what I'll do is I'll read this article and talk about some other things in the second hour of the show. But I'll run down the first hour of the show by saying, look, if you really want to support this show and support me, just buy my books. I don't want money from you, from donations, that's all cursed money. It has no value. But I would love you to buy the books. I'd especially love you to buy the Druid Code, because I think that's a book that most of my audience who read the show will probably enjoy. It's a good read. It's not just all text. It's full of illustrations and drawings. Most of them are my own. And it's got a useful index. And if you want to, I read the book again last night, and I know, without tooting my own horn, it is a bloody good book. It's definitely the best one I've written. It's almost like the book I was meant to write. And people who've read it have come back to me saying the same things. If you go to thomassheridanarts.com, you will see the link there for it. It's also on Amazon, but I prefer if you're going to buy it from one of the online retailers, go to Book Depository. That's a good one. Or Barnes and Nobles online. Or you go if you live in America or Canada, go into Walden Books or wherever the big chains are there, Barnes and Noble, and order the book. Just give them the ISD number, which you will get from thomassheridanarts.com. Just go to the website, and that's all I want from you. I don't want anything else. And that way I get shall we say, a remuneration of sorts for helping out, giving all this stuff information. I've given away vast amounts of information for free, and you don't, and what you get is a good book or good books in return. So that's all I ask. It's just I'm going to continue making shows like what I've been making up until now, and they're only going to get better as my archives and my knowledge base and my arcane documents and other resources are just getting bigger and bigger and more insightful. And this show, The Velocity of Now, will be, along with my websites and other things, a phenomenal resource of stuff that just isn't available anywhere else. Just like the Clara M. Good, The Power of Thought article I just read for you, this is the way to go. So I'll see you on the second hour of the show, and I hope you enjoyed what you heard so far. Thank you.